Welcome, everyone. Hello. Great turnout today. This is a real popular topic, and we're so glad that you've been able to take the time to join us. Welcome. My name is Jennifer Apacella. I am the program director at the Pittsburgh Robotics Network. So first off, I just wanted to give you a little understanding. If you're not familiar with the Pittsburgh Robotics Network, we represent one of the world's largest robotics communities. So many of you probably know about Carnegie Mellon University's leadership in computer science, robotics, research, development, and artificial intelligence. But what is equally impressive and not always as well understood is the depth and breadth of Pittsburgh's commercial robotics business community. So our organization has over 100 members, and they represent nearly 18 different industry segments in robotics, which is fantastic and unique. So, and 9 of those segments, we have 5 or more robotics companies in those areas. So really just a fantastic ecosystem here in this area. So, and because of that, Pittsburgh is now often referred to as the robotics capital of the world. So yeah, it is our mission to connect you, our audience, with this rapidly growing industry community. And as we work together to accelerate the overall adoption of autonomous systems. And so welcome here today, we welcome you. So if you want to learn more about us or stay up to date on our robotics news, announcements, other events and opportunities like today, we encourage you to follow us on social. If you check the chat, you'll find some links. As a matter of fact, you can do that right now. Our handles are right there. So definitely follow us. We've got lots of exciting announcements. With a community this big and this varied, there are news and announcements all the time. So if you want to stay up to date, definitely check us out on social, and we welcome those followers. And you can tag us and engage with us. We love our community. So that brings us here today to what you've all joined us for, our Robotics Talent Spotlight. So this is a very popular series. This is the kickoff of this series. And what you're going to see here today is this new virtual series is going to feature different organizations and the people that work there in this space. The goal is to open the door and invite you in, right, to introduce you to some of the people that actually work at these robotics organizations so that you can learn a little bit more about who they are, where they work, what they're doing, what types of robotics innovations they're working on. And these candid accounts and shared stories, I think this is the best way, right, to help sort of demystify some of the unknowns when it comes to this very fast pace and ever-changing area of robotics and artificial intelligence technologies. So by the end of this topic, you should better understand this organization, the work, the technology, their mission, culture, jobs. Yeah, so today we're going to be talking with 2 individuals from Facebook AI Research. They're going to share their backgrounds, experiences, and stories so that you can get a better understanding of the work that they do. Now, before we go into that, I'd be remiss if I did not recognize, some of the leading sponsors of the Pittsburgh Robotics Network. So these organizations that you see here are the Pittsburgh robotics community, right? They are true leaders in their respective areas. And so if you check the chat, you're going to see links to each of these organizations, fantastic organizations. We've got, academic powerhouses of research and talent like Carnegie Mellon University, one of our founding sponsors, and the University of Pittsburgh. We also have Denton's law firm, JP Morgan and Cohen. These are global business growth leaders, right? These are real valuable partners with our robotics community. And then, of course, we've got the strong leaders of autonomous development, such as Argo AI, one of our founding sponsors as well. And you see Aurora here too. So notably in autonomous vehicle development. So thank you to these fantastic organizations. And I encourage each and every one of you to check them out if you're not familiar with them. Speaking of fantastic organizations, today's event is presented by Facebook AI Research. Really a great organization that seeks to further our fundamental understanding in both new and existing technology domains, covering the full spectrum of topics that are related to artificial intelligence with the mission of advancing the state of the art of AI through open research for the benefit of all. So thank you so much to Facebook AI Research. Also, check the chat here. You're going to see some links. They are hiring. So if this organization and the work that you hear about that they're doing today appeals to you and you think you might want to look into working there, check the chat. There are links to some job postings, and there's also a contact there who can maybe guide you further, a recruiting contact that you can reach out to. So thank you, Facebook AI. All right. The last piece of housekeeping I will mention is we will be, at the end of this discussion, opening up questions from the audience. So what I would encourage each of you to do is there is a Q&A button, a Q&A Zoom chat, or a Q&A Zoom feature. You can submit your questions using that Q&A tool throughout the course of the discussion. We're going to queue those up, and then in the last 10 minutes, we will go into there and pull out some questions that we'll ask directly to our panelists today that came from you, our fantastic audience. So definitely you can do that throughout the course of, don't be shy, you can ask a question anonymously or be named, but we do welcome all your questions. Okay, so that brings us to our discussion today. I'll be moderating today's discussion featuring Facebook AI and these two fantastic individuals who work there. So we've got one panelist who's from the engineering side of things, whose work is on sort of the engineering side, both software and hardware. And then we have someone from the science side. So giving you two different perspectives of the work that they do. So Stuart Anderson is the research engineering manager at Facebook AI Research and also a roboticist. Stuart previously held other roles in robotics and obtained his PhD from Carnegie Mellon Robotics Institute, where he studied control systems for humanoid robots performing dynamic tasks. He's joined today by Vikash Kumar, who is a research scientist also at Facebook AI Research, who's held other research science roles and obtained his PhD from the University of Washington in research focused on imparting human-level dexterity to anthropomorphic robotic hands. All right, so we're going to dig into what exactly that means for those who haven't done work of this type and learn a little bit more about them and their organization and the work that they do. So with that, I'm going to stop sharing and thank you both for joining us today. Welcome.
Thank you.
So let's dig on in. Let's start with the first question I'm thinking is on the top of everyone's mind, right? Many of us have probably heard of Facebook. It's kind of a big organization, very well known. However, I don't know that everybody is familiar with Facebook AI Research, or how is that part of the organization? What do they do? So why don't we take this time here at the beginning, if each of you could maybe give us an overview of how the Facebook AI Research labs, teams is different than Facebook? Is it a part of Facebook? And give us a little overview of what that means.
Sure, that's a great opening question. I'd love to talk a little bit about what makes Facebook AI Research, what we call FAIR, such a unique place to do research in AI and robotics. So FAIR was founded in 2013 by Jan LeCun with the goal of building a world-leading research organization to advance the state of the art in AI. And that's something that is important to me and to Facebook, because a world where AI advances in alignment with our values around freedom, responsibility, excellence, scale, collaboration, and openness is a world where Facebook is better able to complete its mission of helping to bring the world closer together. Those values, I think, are something that is embedded in FAIR's culture and how we build our organization. So FAIR Labs, which is the most exploratory part of the FAIR research organization and where Vikash and I are both working, is an open research organization that works primarily with academic partners and on our own open research that's curiosity driven and typically bottom up in terms of how the research agenda is generated. we organize ourselves into several distinct research areas, things like natural language processing, computer vision, reinforcement learning, core ML theory. The area that Prakash and I are part of is called Embodied AI. And this encompasses both robotics as well as what we call egocentric agents. So virtual agents that still have a location and point of view in the world. FAIR has grown significantly since 2013. We now have offices at main campus in Menlo Park, in Seattle, Pittsburgh, Toronto, Boston, New York, London, Paris, and Tel Aviv. And I'm trying to think if there's anything else I want to say at this point. I think I'll hand it off to Vikash and see if he has anything to add to answer this question.
I'll just follow up. The organization is spread across a couple of different institutions, like the campuses Stuart mentioned, and we do collaborate across all these different institutions. So we will talk broadly as FAIR as the whole organization across these landmarks. Additionally, I would also like to mention that our focus is more towards the science. There is no particular need or alignment required for product for us. We are purely here for scientific endeavors and pushing the goal of pure science and open science forward for the benefit of the entire community.
That's a great point. I should say the way we measure our success at FAIR across the whole organization is along 3 axes. And those are our scientific impact, which is typically going to be academic publications, and essentially the new knowledge that we're able to generate. It is our support for the research community. This is one of the things that I care most deeply about, is releasing software platforms and other tools that allow more people to engage more productively with research across the whole research community that we're involved with. And then third, we do think about how our work impacts the future of the company, not at the level of necessarily an individual product where some other parts of our AI org might be focused, but in terms of opening up the possibilities for new products. So if you're paying attention to what Facebook is talking about in terms of AR, VR, and the metaverse strategy, some of the technologies we're building, we think are important to being able to realize that full vision.
That's great. I think that's really helpful, really clarifying for sure. So you touched on a few things that I think were probably interesting or illuminating, but when it comes to robotics, I think that understanding a little bit more about, I don't think people naturally think Facebook and robotics together, right, in side by side, yet a lot of the work that you're doing is specifically involving robotics. So yeah, could you help us understand a little bit more about the work you're doing specifically focused on robotics with Facebook AI research?
Sure, Prakash, do you want to lead off with an overview of some of our functional manipulation work?
Right. So the particular style of robotics that we do here, I want to highlight a little bit of that because it's different from the robotics that we commonly understand. When we think of robotics, we usually think pre-programmed movements and factory floors. There are lots of robots going up and down and repeating those movements. I think there is a slight departure from that viewpoint when we think of robotics. We think of robots which are much more friendly and present in convenient home settings. These settings are different than robot floors because they're unstructured. You cannot predict what's going to happen. So any of the pre-programmed of scripted movements that worked on the factory floor, all of a sudden, those strategies are not going to work. So in order to bridge this divide or different viewpoint of where robotics is and where we want them to be, we particularly focus on one particular paradigm, which we called data-driven robotics. We want data to be able to inform the decision-making of the robots. And there is a core principle behind it that as we see more and more data and more diverse data, our robots should get better and better and more intelligent with time. And how do we enable this? Hopefully, I'll give more sprinkles of information for the rest of the discussion, but that's the core fundamental, that we try to do data-driven robotics. We want to make robots work in unstructured settings. We want them to do work and operations which are not pre-specified, and through their gathered intellect and getting smarter over time, they should be able to understand, okay, this context is similar to the previous context I've seen before, but I need to generalize my information or generalize my prior knowledge under this new setting to act intelligently in this new particular setting.
Thanks. That's a great setup. I'm going to sort of give my categories, how I structure thinking about the work we do here within the broad outlines that Vikash has communicated. I sort our work into basically 4 buckets. There's plenty of work that doesn't fall into these. Like I said, the work is bottom up. So this is sort of an emergent order, not necessarily something that's been decided and then we have to work within these buckets. But I think this is useful for understanding broadly what we're working on. So one of the things Vikash mentioned is the importance of having rich data and having lots of data. And in the manipulation space, one of the ways we do this is by doing original research into hardware. So if you look at projects like Digit, which we've released as open source hardware, this is a great example of building a technology that enables rich sensing during tactile interactions. Digit is a vision-based fingertip for a robot that essentially allows it to see the surface texture of an object in incredible detail when it comes into contact with it. The same way we work with low-cost tactile skin, projects like Reskin. We work with designing reliable and low-cost dexterous hands for manipulation. And these are all projects that are trying to build the critical pieces of hardware we need to be able to scale up our robotics research and collect richer data about the types of interactions that robots are having with the world. So that's the first bucket, hardware to support dexterous manipulation. Second bucket is the work that Vikash and his collaborators focus on, which is how do we learn to use objects and generalize our understanding of objects to new instances of objects in the world. I'll let Vikash talk a little bit more about that work later, but you can essentially think of it as dexterous functional manipulation to complete tasks in unstructured environments. The next group of research I think of as taking the classic algorithmic systems-based approach to robotics and bringing it into the world of AI-driven robotics. And in particular, I'm thinking about work by people like Mustafa Mukadam, who are studying how to take optimization-based systems. So if you're a roboticist, you're familiar with things like state estimation or trajectory optimization, these optimization-based systems or methods for building robot systems. And what we're working on is taking the classical robotic stack, making it, we'd say differentiable, but essentially making it compatible with a machine learning environment, and then being able to kind of sprinkle in small learned elements into the classical and slightly inflexible robotic systems that we already know how to deploy. And then the final bucket, which is one where we are actively trying to increase the number of scientists that we have working in this area, is human-robot interaction. Essentially, how do robots learn to collaborate with humans to complete manipulation tasks? So for instance, how would you work with a robot to fold a piece of laundry or load a dishwasher? And how can robots learn to infer the intent and understanding of the world that their human collaborators have? Those are the 4 big buckets that our research sorts into.
So I think that's really helpful to understand. So we've gotten a little bit of a better understanding now about the work that is done there, and specifically around robotics. That was a great breakdown. Thank you for that. So let's shift gears here a little bit. I think that from a skills perspective, right, robotics skills are in high demand, and there are probably a lot of different opportunities you each have had in your careers, right? You didn't start off doing this. So I think it would be really helpful if each of you could just take a few minutes to share a little bit about your career journey and how you ended up at Facebook AI Research, where you started, and then, why you made that choice, because there are a lot of companies out there. You could do research, or you could have gone into working for a commercial solution, a customer-driven organization with this. So, but yeah, why Facebook AI? Why did you each choose that? And tell us a little bit about your interests.
I'll give a piece of my answer. Maybe I'll have some more thoughts when once Prakash shares his. But for me, one of the unique things that's enabled by working at a company like Facebook is that we have the diversity of experience and the ability to work at scale that lets us take on some of the hardest problems in AI. And what I mean is that I have immediate access to peers and collaborators who are at the cutting edge of their respective fields across everything from systems engineering to hardware engineering to the various subdomains of artificial intelligence. And for a cross-disciplinary domain like robotics, having those diverse collaborators is incredibly important. The other thing is that as robotics has moved into the age of artificial intelligence, we have needed to be more able to scale our research and the systems that support our research in a way that there aren't a lot of companies that have the engineering experience and resources to build reliable systems at that scale. And Facebook is one of those. So when I look at how are we going to take robotics into an age where we need to scale up data collection, we need to scale up our ability to do learning on these systems, Facebook is one of the few places, and Facebook AI research is one of the few places where we have the combination of people with cutting edge skills and the experience and resources to build at scale. That's what makes FAIR the place for me to be right now. Prakash?
All right, I might take you to the personal roller coaster journey on this one. Let's see if I do justice. So I think I was very interested in fiddling around with the system as a kid. I have broken more number of things that I've put together. Let's just say my mom will like really resonate with that feeling, the number of things I've broken in the house. But I was also interested in maths. I was not a computer scientist to begin with. I was just doing math. And I remember this one particular day when I was sort of demotivated because I was just like, I learned a lot of these cool maths, ring theory and complex algebra and things like that. I do not know how they actually work or like what's the benefit of even using that. And I was discussing this with one of my seniors at the time. And he just said like, hey, have you heard about robotics club in the university? And I was like, no. And that started my journey with robotics. And what I found cool was all of a sudden, all these different things that I was learning in classes started making sense because I had an outlet for them. I was using those concepts to build like small toy cars, trying to obstacle avoid them, line following. I think anyone with robotics experience probably started over there, but that was my outlet or the hook to, get into the field. And what has changed from that day to today is a realization that robotics is not one piece. You can't just build a line following robot in your home and expect that that is going to be as useful and as like it will fulfill the vision of robotics that we have today. It requires a lot of pieces. It requires expertise from different places, some mechanical expertise, some engineering expertise, some scaling expertise, algorithmic expertise, people from natural language settings, people from vision, people from scene understanding. And when everything comes together, then we have an ecosystem that is capable of being the best robot that we want to be. And that was the appeal for Facebook for me, that we have experts from pretty much every area that I named off. And I might be good at one thing, but I'm pretty terrible with everything else. And I would rather be with friends and amongst colleagues that are best of the field in those settings. And I think the robotics is the puzzle. And unless all these pieces fit together, it's not going to come together well. And this is important. And this is also important that this happens more organically and bottom up, because each one of these pieces are also morphing. As we develop each one of these pieces, we do not know it's going to fit together with like the next person developing the next, best sensor out there or best algorithm out there. So we need to constantly morph and change our strategies. And a bottom-up organization is really good for that. The second thing, which is what happened here, is when we think of robotics, we usually think of, like I said, scripted movements. So think of like, what are these scripted movements? These are human intellect poured down into a sequence of strategies or lines that go repeat that. It's puppeteering, right? Which means that even if you do the best puppeteering, the best robot you can create is what is going to be how much of we can pin down these rules into a paper, or how powerful our language is, or how powerful our thought is. And that has been the ceiling for robotics today, right? You see most of the things being rigid and fragile because these sequence of rules that we have penned down is very fragile. And what deep learning, the modern era of deep learning or data-driven learning, has taught us that whenever you put human in middle of something, it inherently does not scale. But what scales is data. What scales is if we can scale operation and let the data infer or like allow us to evolve our algorithms, a robot gets better and better over time. And some of these expertise is also available at Facebook. How do we operate at scale? How do we consume a lot of data and then use that data to benefit or like evolve our algorithms or agent with time? How do we do it in such a way that we have linear or like super linear growth curves rather than a plateauing growth curves? And of the audience who are joining us, and we all know, curse of dimensionality, the moment you scale, it looks good in the beginning and soon you start hitting plateau and it gets exponentially hard to scale. And some of those reasons are why an organization that knows how to scale, an organization that has experts from every place, an organization where we can build the whole puzzle together is the best place to be.
Thanks, Akash. I really like that answer. And it actually resonates with some of the personal reasons that I have for working in robotics. You know, I love these problems that seem so simple as an embodied person who can take a walk in the woods or pour myself a cup of tea when I want to. And those tasks that seem so simple to us are so hard when we try to describe them in a formal way and have another system reproduce them. I think your point about how sort of classical robotics is this exercise in describing the patterns we use to solve problems. And as we move to data-driven robotics, the tools we use to describe those behaviors change from being about the particular instances that's, explaining what a pouring motion is, what a cup of coffee is, to thinking about the rules that describe how you work with the data. And for me, these are all different exercises in understanding what it is to be an embodied person and how, how these problems that we solve every day without really thinking about it are actually solved and how we learn to solve them. So I think there's some really fascinating problems at the core of the type of research we're doing. And it's really exciting to me to see the approaches that we use to solving them changing over time. That's maybe the most exciting thing about being at a place that's working at the cutting edge of the field, is that it's not just pushing the existing methods further, it's figuring out new metaphors for working with robotics.
Well, thank you for sharing that. I think that's very helpful to give people some context about, why you two, each as individuals, decided, Facebook AI research. But that brings me to another point, I think, right? When it comes to robotics, there are companies out there who are, building and making sort of solutions, right, for businesses, or solving different problems in the world by creating solutions, and then, customers order them and they become, part of a solution for customers and business. So what drew you to research specifically? For someone out there who might have skills and they might be thinking like, oh, there's so many different robotics companies. I think all robotics organizations do research and development within the organization themselves, since it is so emerging. So what would you, if you could help us understand what is different about working, say, for a commercial company versus, in strict research, the pros and cons or the benefits?
Okay, I can get started on that. I think like maybe I'll start with a broader statement and then slowly try to dive down into the details. So my broader statement is the science is unscripted and you have to have an exploratory hat on top. And when we do product-driven like development, then you know what you're trying to build and you try to walk backwards. So one is walking backwards from the goal and the other one is starting there and then just going in a direction which we do not know what is there and still trying to make your way, still trying to make sure you're making progress. So this is two different ways of operation in some sense. One is where you're grounded in something you know where you're moving, and the other one is just being comfortable in not knowing where you're going and slowly paving your path forward. Right. So the appeal of being in a research-driven field is it's usually an organic work culture where you discuss ideas, you brainstorm ideas, you evaluate their values. So you immediately see your ideas come into effect or like being incorporated in the project way earlier than a product-driven approaches where maybe your solutions have been put on a whiteboard and you know how to do it and you're more involved in getting the nitty-gritty details right. So Stuart, do you have any point?
No, I think that's a great answer. As someone who's worked both in product-driven contexts and in exploratory research contexts, I enjoy both. I think the thing that is particularly exciting to me about being in the FAIR environment is that the ability to pivot quickly based on where the science is taking you and where your curiosity is taking you. There aren't the same constraints on timeline and realized business impact that you have. And sometimes that can be frustrating when things don't work and you feel like you're spinning. That's part of doing research. But for me right now, having that freedom to build in the directions that we feel are the most likely to yield interesting research outcomes is a really important feature.
Yeah, for me, I think a couple of other points is it really lets you ask questions that are further out rather than immediate questions. We usually think of certain things. I wonder why that is the case. And I think this is the place to ask those questions without any constraints on bounds on why am I allowed to ask those questions? Should I ask someone's permission before asking those questions? Here you have the flexibility to do those. So often people ask me, what do you do for work? And I usually say to them, I just play with really expensive toys. That's basically what robots are. I just play with expensive toys. They are a piece of metal, like call them furniture right now, let's just say. They're a piece of furniture right now sitting there looking pretty, and unless you put in decision-making in them, unless they can respond to the field, unless they can understand their context and reflect a significant action that is proportional and appropriate for that context, we don't call that a robot, right? So robot is essentially a furniture plus good decision-making.
I think that was a great, helpful clarification, good perspectives on that. So something else I think that might be top of mind for people, right, with all the changes to the workforce that have been happening over the past year and a half, right, a lot of changes at people's jobs and the way that they work. So maybe help us understand a little bit about what it's like actually to work at Facebook AI, right? And this could be these are some practical things, right? In terms of an experience. I know everyone, when they decide where they're going to work or what kind of jobs they want to have, or if they're happy with the job they currently have, they might be looking for different things than they were looking for 2 years ago. So remote work might be absolutely essential. Or maybe they hate remote work and they want a hybrid, they want an office and they want to build a team culture. Or maybe some people are drawn to startups and they say, well, I don't want to work for a big corporate feel kind of company. I'd rather work for an intimate team and a smaller company. So things like that, right? Can you help us understand a little bit about your everyday, day-to-day experience working at Facebook AI research and what that's like as a human?
Yeah, that's a great question. It's a hard one because we get so used to our day to day that we forget to notice it. And so, let me talk about some of the things that maybe I take for granted about being here. But one is that we are a small, tightly knit organization, even if we are globally distributed. My teams are in Pittsburgh and Menlo Park, and the robotics team operates as a single team across sites. We are really focused on flexibility in terms of supporting people through COVID, supporting, as a parent of a 3-year-old, having the available options for leaves, for different accommodations that have let me continue to do the best work that I can in a situation that has been actually quite challenging as a parent in many situations over the last 2 years. Has been really a privilege and something that I've enjoyed about being here. But coming back to the beginning of my answer, the most important thing about FAIR is that even inside of a big company, we are a small, tightly knit group of people who care deeply about the work we're doing. And the thing I look forward to every day is, like the meeting Vikash and I were just in before we joined this call, was a bunch of people who are working on an incredibly complex project to scale up manipulation research in robotics, who are all bringing their own expertise to it. And the discussions that come out of that and the work that gets done is, it's uniquely motivating. Vikash, do you have a different angle on this?
Yeah, I think like some of the things when I walk into the office every day and realize how amazing this day is one of the things is the artwork around the office. Different places have their own artworks. The artwork in this office is all robot themed. And I'm like, who came up with this? Or like, how do you find robot themed artwork? And you can pretty much like think of anything, stuffed toys to, carved woods to stained glasses, everything in the robot themed. And it's like, yeah, this is awesome. And that reminds me, I have more robot colleagues than actually human colleagues. And that makes it a unique place to be. And if this is not the fun place to be, where else should I go, right? But this lightweight things aside, some of the really critical pieces is that I believe our organization supports not only workplace development, but lifestyle and work-life balance as well, right? We have lots of benefits that are not just focused on improving your work productivity, but also helping you through different places, wherever you are in your life. There are benefits for childcare, benefits for planned parenting, benefits if you're going through some like tough times in your life. Additionally, I would also say the group, there is an internal platform which you use for communication. It's called Workplace, and it's open to all. We can pretty much join any conversation. We can look into any groups and what kind of work they are doing. An additional benefit of this openness becomes that we have social groups inside. So I recently moved to Pittsburgh, and one of the things that I had to do is make some friends because this is a new place for me. And the first thing I do is I play sand volleyball. I just looked workplace for sand volleyball, right? And immediately found a bunch of people across organization, not just FAIR, some other Facebook office people, FAIR people, just teaming up as a group to play sand volleyball. And then I realized, there are board games, there are canoeing clubs, there are taekwondo clubs, and the list goes on. And the point here is that these sort of organizational people coming together, bringing people coming together. These evidences are first found internally, and we take some of these successful recipes and try to also make it available externally to it as well. Just as well, these simple things happen around games and sports and socialization. You can also imagine there is some groups for support, which have of similar flavor. If you have a newborn and then you're trying to understand how to balance work-life balance, there is a group for that. You can join and they will talk about like how they are structuring their calendars, trying to find support for their kids, et cetera, et cetera. So I think like just the possibilities of this open culture and then trying to bring people together just presents, and the focus on both work plus life balance. I think there are a lot of good stuff embedded in these tiny trinklets.
Excellent. Yeah, thank you. Every company is different with the benefits and the sort of the social aspect, the human aspect that they have for their employees. So it's good to have a little peek into that. Something actually I think that's very important, especially today, right, is that having diverse perspectives represented, right? Having organizations that are forward thinking, that understand the value, and not only understand, but value, right, what it's like to have a diverse workforce, and then don't just talk the talk, they walk that walk with programs and resource groups and things like that. So if either of you could just speak briefly today about, what kind of diversity, equity, and inclusion programs, what is Facebook AI's stance on that, and how do they support that?
That's a great question. I'm really glad you asked. This was something that was important to me when I was thinking about coming to work at FAIR. And one of the things I realized is that not just FAIR, but the whole AI org leadership understands that doing AI research and doing it responsibly and ethically requires a diversity of viewpoints to understand the impact of our work as we conduct it. And in support of building that diversity, we have a number of programs that fall into the broad categories of what we call find, grow, and keep. And I can talk about several of those programs. So thinking about how do we bring people into the organization, we have programs like AI Residency, our co-teaching programs with universities like Georgia Tech that have historically very diverse grad student populations. And we apply what's called the diverse slate approach in our recruitment process. You can read more about that on our website. That's the find pillar of our DEI strategy. We also focus on growing in diversity, diverse talent internally, and retaining diverse talent. And to do that, we have a number of programs. One of the flagships there is our FBRG, or Facebook Resource Groups, which are identity, interest, or affiliation-based groups that support different communities within Facebook, either through membership or allyship. And then we also have formal mentorship programs that are open to everyone at Facebook, like our Odyssey program, as well as sponsorship programs that link senior leaders with junior folks in the organization and help them to grow their careers. The other thing uniquely about the AI org is, I said that the AI org recognizes that DEI is critical to our success. And because of that, we're a leader within the company in terms of setting some of the highest bars for managers and IC participation in education, in participating in these DEI programs. We really want to be leaders, not just have Facebook be a leader, but be leaders within Facebook for helping these programs develop and be successful.
Maybe a side point I would like to add is, like, in addition to DIY initiatives, which we also have, which I think is important, is we have a team for responsible AI. That it basically we also think deeply about the products and the research that we are doing, and we feel responsible towards it. So the team that is responsible AI, as we push the boundaries of AI, what responsibilities do we have? Are we aligned properly with a positive mindset forward? All of these things are properly looked upon and we pay attention to. Before we put our research out there, we do think about what it should reflect. Are there any side or corners of these research? So before we put out our work, we usually have a group of people and advisors looking into those research before making it forward. So we do deeply care about our work as well, in addition to our people.
Excellent points. Thank you for that. Okay, well, we're getting a ton of questions coming in from the audience, which is great in our Q&A, but I want to ask you just one more question before we go over to the audience questions. So you're both located in Pittsburgh, correct?
Correct.
Right. And then, but you did mention that you have a global distributed team. But I think for those of us, a lot of us here are in Pittsburgh, although we do have a global audience that's joined us today. We'd love to learn, can you give us an example of a project that you are working on in the research lab here in Pittsburgh, or on in your team in general? Just give us a peek into a project that you're both working on and how you're each doing different things with it, or just give us a peek into your a real-time project you can talk about.
Right. Maybe I can get started on this. I'll connect different pieces throughout my responses and see if it comes together. So one of the things that we do is data-driven robotics. So we'll connect that piece. One of the pieces we also mentioned is we are doing a lot of manipulation. Okay, so one of the big projects along these two directions is what we call a RoboPen project. And let me demystify this keyword RoboPen. So think of kids playing in a playpen. You usually have a safe ground with a lot of toys and tools, and you just leave your kids there and they have a really great time. They're allowed to do whatever they're allowed to do over there, right? Now, with all these contexts, let's see how do we make robots fit in all these in this picture. Okay, usually what we do typically in the robots today, is we try the robots to make them do one task at a time. And we do learn that task. Let's just say I'm trying to pick up this glass of water, and then I just picked it up over and over again and learned that task. But it's constraining. I can only pick up one glass of water. I might have 100 things like this, 1,000,000 things like this. Tomorrow, a whole setting will be different, right? And we want our robots to adapt and adjust to this. If you look at how kids do it, the kids do not practice the same task over and over. What they do is they have small experiences on one setting, then a next small set of experience in next setting, and a different set of experience tomorrow, then they have a different set of toys day after. And what they do is they take these different snippets of information or the data over time, and they put them together. And the next day, they are a smarter individual. So instead of practicing and trying the same thing over and over, the mindset here is about letting our robots experience a diverse set of scenes, diverse set of outcomes they can have the scene. And once you have the data from all of these diverse settings, then how do we assimilate that data? How do we build algorithms such that the next strategy using which they are collecting these data next day, they tend to being a little bit better than the day before. And we want to do this over and over. So the key prospects here is we need lots of data. Second, we need a lot of diversity in that data because we don't want these agents to just become narrow in doing one thing or two things. So a lot of diversity. And the third thing is algorithms that get better as the scale of data grows. So there is a lot of engineering challenge in making all of these three things happen. And this is why having someone like Stuart next to us just amazingly makes my life simpler, where I can make the small thing happen. And like, hey, Stuart, this is the sprout that I want to grow into a tree. And then he takes that from there and presents all his engineering team and engineering practices. And the meeting that he just mentioned before is all about scaling. How do we go from small algorithmic proof of concept into really realizing the potential of that concept? So maybe Stuart can explain a little bit on that. How do we deal with some of those scaling up issues?
Yeah. I think that's a great question. I was actually taking a peek at some of the Q&A, and since we're running into Q&A time, I'll try to combine an answer to one of those with the answer to your question. One of the ways that we think about scaling is being able to scale the number of annotators and operators for a system like the one that Vikash is talking about. So for instance, we would like to be able to bring the RoboPen system and expose it on, say, a public web through Mechanical Turk or something like that, to have either annotators tell us how well the robots are completing their tasks, what the problem is if the robot isn't completing a task, or to have someone actually tell up the robot through some safe interface to provide additional demonstrations of tasks that we'd like the robot to be able to complete. And so part of the work that I do is working with Vikash and the other scientists to understand the types of data that they'd like to collect, the types of tasks they'd like to complete, and to design and build those software systems that let us expose some of these resources as tasks on something like Mechanical Turk. That's one aspect of what we do. I think the other parts of scaling looks a lot like scaling any other web scale system, right? We have CI that runs on the robot, continuous integration testing that runs on the robots, where they are always going to be running through some reference motions. We're going to observe those with cameras. We're going to make sure that the software is still doing the same thing, and the robots aren't performing particularly differently because of a hardware malfunction either. We employ the same software engineering practices you'd find at any other large-scale software company in terms of making sure that the code we produce is reusable and readable and maintainable. I think the challenging thing about working in an environment like FAIR is that often we are asked to sort of move on the continuum between code that is going to be used in a single experiment for a single paper and code that's going to be reused as part of our robotics infrastructure platform. Anyways, I want to leave room for questions, so I'll stop rambling. Thank you.
One line I would like to add is this is a snippet of one of the projects. And as we said, like we are a flexible workforce with multiple projects in there. Often what happens is we need a lot of different kind of talent in order to be able to scale, in order to be able to do like data acquisition. We mentioned hardware, we mentioned scaling, we do algorithms. So really the kind of talent that work here are people who are really curious about things, people who are on the top of their game, and people that particularly don't fit in a bucket. So if you think, like robotics is something that gets you excited, I think I'm pretty good at something that I do, I think reach out. I think that's the best way to know if you fit in the picture, because we do not have a mold in which anyone fits. We just talk and we figure out where you fit in the whole picture.
That's a really good point. I'm glad you mentioned that. And so we're actually going to switch to the Q&A now. We've got a lot. Some of the questions we're going to try and condense or combine. We've got a lot of questions from you all. So thank you all for being so active here in the Q&A section. We're going to share in the chat a link to the job postings again, and also a recruiting contact at Facebook AI Research. We're getting, for those of you who have questions about what types of skills, right, are being hired for right now. I know specifically, Stuart and Vikas, you mentioned that there is that robotics engineer job. Even if you don't fit the mold for that job description, that job posting is that resume is going to be received by your recruiting contacts in your team. So whether you're an undergrad, a postgrad, a PhD, all different levels, whether you, like Vikas, you have a mathematics background or not, you're not computer science, or you're not on paper a roboticist, but you're interested in this kind of work and you want to learn more if there's a role for you, go ahead and submit your information either to Chris directly via email or just right through that job portal. You never know.
So there are only two doors. They're not like one door is for researcher, another door is for engineer. So you only have to make one decision, is like, should I apply on the engineering side of things, or should I apply on the research side of things? It doesn't matter what kind of engineer you are. It doesn't matter what kind of science you want to do. Those two job postings are very generic job posting, just apply to those. Fantastic.
Okay, so I'm going to switch here. Now we've got several questions from everyone. So if you have any hiring questions, we're going to direct you for skills and hiring, things like that, to the recruiting email, Chris, I believe, whose email is in the chat. So you can certainly inquire that way. We've got a lot of future forward looking questions, right? Everyone is thinking about the future of robotics, right? This tech is just changing every day in terms of what's possible and things like that. So I'll take a couple questions I think that might touch on that. So for example, for the projects you all are working on, Ganesh had a question specifically about, do you have any sort of production or deployment goals for your projects, right? Can your projects be categorized? Like, is it long-term? Are you looking future forward 5-10 years for possible deployments in real life? Or is it purely just experimental? And you can just touch on that briefly if you don't mind, either one of you.
I think there are projects on both front. More exploratory projects are something that we take it on a short term, just exploration, and try to figure out if there is a positive result that we see. If we do, we press on that. So there are a lot of exploratory, smaller scale projects, but we do have a slightly medium-term and long-term agenda, which are not as concrete. So we internally organize ourselves into some milestones within the team. So for example, the functional manipulation projects that we talked about, we do have a 6-month milestone we are trying to chase, a 1-year milestone we are trying to chase, but these are team level milestones. We do not in general have any Facebook alignment milestone, but we do try to align ourselves whenever the research actually allows us to align ourselves.
Excellent. Great question. Good answer. Now, in terms of in your perspectives, right, and this is for either one of you, what role do you think AI will play in the next 5 years for the everyday person? So for example, just like now the internet touches everything we do you think AI is going to become common among us all? And how does Facebook AI see themselves functioning in that space, right? And in terms of, and also, Pittsburgh is pretty leading in AI tech development here locally. So yeah, what do you think about AI and how it's going to touch everyone over the next 5 years?
So I'm going to give a maybe funny answer to this, which is that I think AI is already here and has been here for a while. It's behind most of the large scale systems that we have deployed at a societal level, from social media to your credit score to the judicial system. I don't see a sea change in terms of AI finally landing in the next 5 years. I think the technologies that back AI are deeply integrated into supply chains, into logistics, agriculture, healthcare. So that's my answer. Vikash, maybe you have a different take.
I think I resonate with you. Like, people often think AI is some mystical thing that all of a sudden is going to appear, but I think it's nothing new. We have seen this over and over. What is AI? It's an automated decision-making entity, and it makes decision. And why does it make decision? To make our life easier. We first walked and we figured out horses were our AI because they made it go faster, right? From there, we went to mechanically driven cars. I mean, sure, we don't think of them as AI in traditional sense right now, but they were decision-making entities that made our life easier. That slowly morphed and evolved into something which is more software-driven AI right now, from internet routing protocols to jumping on this webinar to getting your Amazon recommendation systems to browsing on internet. Everything is basically making decisions on the background to make your life easier. And this is just going to get better and better with time. So I don't think there was ever a start. I don't think there is ever going to be an end. We are in a continuum somewhere, and the world has world has its way of surprising us, and we are here for a roller coaster ride. We'll see how it goes.
That's great. Yeah. And so, we had an assortment of questions that came in through the chat, but what I would say is that if you have questions that didn't get answered, if it's about hiring, please see in the chat the reference to the job postings and the other contact. We did also have contact information. You can connect with us on LinkedIn. A lot of the questions were prognosticating sort of future forward visioning kind of stuff. And I don't know that we have concrete answers for those, but I just want to be respectful of everyone's time and wrap things up here. So I want to thank all of you for tuning in. This is a recorded session, so this will be available on the YouTube channel. You might even be watching it on the YouTube channel for playback. But I want to thank Stuart and Vikash for joining us today. We want to thank all of our sponsors and especially Facebook AI Research. This has been a fascinating peek into something that I think most people did not know a lot about, and we are all a little, I think, smarter for it. So thank you. And then I want to mention that they are hiring and that there are lots of different opportunities and they're ever changing. So don't be hindered. Submit your information, no problem. So yeah, thank you everyone so much for joining us. With that, I'm going to conclude this session, but feel free to follow us, the Pittsburgh Robotics Network on social, connect with us on LinkedIn. And I want to wish all of you a very, very lovely day or evening or whatever time it may be for you. So thank you so much.